good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever time zone it is, whether you're in the world. It is your Lore Saviour, and today we are talking about Vampire the Masquerade. What a fucking surprise. Specifically, we are talking about first edition of Vampire the Masquerade, and I was going to do a review of this book, basically asking the question whether it's good or not, but 34 years on, I think it's fucking obvious that book, that game, is good in what it does. I mean, this channel would not be here without that game, you lot would not be here without that, etc. and so fucking forth. So, doing a review of that seemed pretty nonsensical. So what I'm going to do instead is basically talk about what I like about it and what I don't like about it, which is just a bit more of a rambly format than what one would expect from a book review, but it's also a book review because I talk about what I do and don't like about that book. So, I don't know what to do with that, but let's just fucking crack on. First of all, I just love its presentation, its artwork. I touched upon this briefly in my review of Chicago by Night 1st and 2nd edition, a double whammy review, which is going to be on the card somewhere for you now. But it's a lot simpler, it's a much easier to understand. It feels a bit more like a document, but it's got some great style and presentation, so it feels distinctively like a game book. And whilst I do love the fact that TTRPG books in the modern era are far more artistic and expressive and they're just works of art within themselves, there's something that I really appreciate about things being a lot simpler. I just appreciate the fact it's just a lot easier and simpler to digest and find the bits of information you're looking for because it's clear, it's concise, and you're not having to hop about from different pages of a poorly structured index to find exactly what you're looking for, which is just fantastic stuff, because that's all you need really at the end of the day. White paper, black text, a bit of artwork here and there, and you're pretty good to go. And even then, you don't need a lot of artwork. And on top of the artwork, that makes me jizz my pants. And it's amazing. Like the work of Tim Bradstreet that goes about the chapter headings of a page, the little illustrations by Joshua Timbrook, and all the other different artists that are included in that book, the OG clan portraits as well. It just provides such a wonderful variety of that OG inception of gothic punk. Vampire the Masquerade, World of Darkness. It's a beautiful capsule to the past where it feels distinctively 90s, but it doesn't feel, to me at least, particularly edgy or dated. It's still got this beautiful aesthetic to it, and the headings of some of the pages got like this sort of rose thorn thing going on the top of the pages as well. It's just beautiful to look at, and it's truly revolutionary. There was nothing quite like it before, and I could just gush about the artwork all day, but we've got more things to talk about, of course. And regarding the artwork, all the way through this book, there is this sort of illustrative story regarding an ancient vampire who gets embraces another, all the way through the book. It sort of reminds me a little bit about that little snippet in the combat chapters of Werewolf the Apocalypse, where you have those two iconic werewolf characters battling it out, shifting in and out of different forms. But this is obviously different because there's a vampire and it's all the way through this core book. And I just feel that's really fucking cool. Interesting that the characters in there are not canonical. And they're actually quite ancient vampires, where first edition is very much on the younger neonate. But it's just really nice to read that through by itself without paying attention to everything else around. Like, where is this story going? The different moods and the themes that are captured through that. You really get a sense of the gothic nature of vampire through those illustrative stories alone, as well as the rest of the core book and what it provides to you. Now, how does it differ in terms of its mechanics and rulings to what would be the newer versions of Vampire the Masquerade? Well, funny enough, I really don't have to adjust my mindset in running and playing it all that much. Because there's like a little suggestions here, like I have to remember to use dodge, because there's an actual dodge skill, rather than using dex and athletics, it's dex and dodge, which makes sense. Both of them do, I mean. Specialties is a bit different because you're actually given a choice about how they could work, but the one option that they give you, which I tend to default to, is that tends to explode with a specialty, which is what later editions would use, of course. There's like no difference of character creation at all. It's the same sort of stats compared to its younger cousins, 2nd revised and 20th anniversary edition. The archetypes was considered optional at the time, which I think is very interesting. What makes it interesting is the fact that in the later editions it wouldn't become an optional thing. And I'm curious to try and work out why that is. Probably because with their NPC characters, they all have the fucking archetypes. and players just chose that, so they just made it a compulsory thing. But it's just interesting to see how little things like that came about, and merits and flaws weren't in the core book either. They would come within the player's guide, which we're also going to talk on the channel, but that's going to be like a fuller rambly review, because there's a lot more I can say about that rather than me out and about waffling about Vampire the Masquerade 1st edition here. And the thing that I just really like about 1st edition as a whole, when compared with all my experience of running Vampire, all of my experience playing Vampire, is that it just strips away all the excess fat. Like, you don't need to worry about additional core books and materials. Like, everything you really need is in that core book, and it's not a huge core book either. And I know that any good TTRPG will just have you rely on its core book for information, but this one here is just because it was the first. There wasn't anything else really to go with it, and the other source books that would be around for 1st edition really felt like added on extras. Even with some of the source books that gave you the option as other playable clans, they did kind of feel like add-ons just to enrich the experience, rather than felt like bits of it were missing. Although that being said, the mentioning of clans Mitzi and La Sombre once in the core book as alluded to like heads of the Sabbat, and then not being mentioned at all in 1st edition, to me was a bit of a silly opportunity. But it wouldn't be too long into 2nd edition with the player's Sabbat handbook that we would know more about those two buggers. But going back a little bit, there's some things that it did with combat that I actually really prefer over what they would do in later editions. For example, initiative with V20 is done by taking your dex and wits, I believe. Yeah, dex and wits, and then you add a specific number to that. No, sorry, you put the two together, and then you roll d10 and then add them up. It's just maths. Maths is just shit. Whereas with 1st edition, it's just you roll those two, and the number of successes just determines who moves first. Now, it also suggests that you can shuffle them about depending on what your character's doing, which I think is pretty cool. And I just love how simplified combat is, and that you don't have bashing damage. It's just lethal and aggravated. It makes it a lot more brutal, a lot more fast. I actually did a whole little combat hack, which you can go and watch the card that's going to pop up right now. And it's something that I'd been doing for years because I thought bashing damage was fucking stupid, and clearly OG White Wolf writers were totally based in that decision, and everybody else thereafter just fucks it up. Well done, VtM. Yeah, just fucking crazy shit. I love the fact at the back of the book it gives you loads of advice, like how to set up a chronicle with all the different gothic punk themes and the ideas and the romanticism and all those things that we expect from Vampire the Masquerade. We actually have an example of Mark Rainhagen actually creating a city idea using these themes, and then once he's done that, you're given a fucking playable chronicle using some of those characters that he's just come up with. That's pretty fucking cool, baptism by fire. And that kind of undermines a comment that I made with Chicago 1st and 2nd edition, what I said that he mentions characters in that book that don't have stats. I now realise that's why they didn't include them there, because it's in the 1st edition core book, but not the 2nd edition one, which I think is still pretty fucking silly. But there is just a rawness with all these descriptions that would get filtered and change with the times, which is by no means a bad thing. A lot of it is actually pretty good, as I've talked about before. But there's something, looking back from someone who started with 5th edition, who has very slowly worked his way backwards to better appreciate the franchise that he's talked about so much. There is a rawness, and this is actually the goth punk. This is the early 90s. Or the late 90s. I've actually forgotten the fucking year it came out. But it's the early 90s because it was 91 and then Werewolf was 92. This was like the revival of the goth movement having just to teeter off in the late 80s, and it just sort of came up with this big old fat boom with Vampire the Masquerade, Interview with a Vampire, and a bunch of other things as well. There was just a magical rawness to that, because it was there, it was current, it was revolutionary, and I still want to argue that to this day it is still pretty revolutionary, and it's just a joy to read, basically. And as per most of my book reviews, I like the storytelling chapter quite a lot, because a lot of it really applies to players as well, and dealing with problematic players is just really blunt and straightforward, because I feel that a lot of modern TTRPG books, rightly or wrongly, go into a great amount of details of how to handle things, safety tools, and loads of other things that I feel kind of dart round the subject, unless you've got an indie political game. that makes a bold, hard statement, we say no to this because it's a deliberate political movement, which has its merits and its flaws. But with first edition Vampire, it's just front and centre saying, hey, if you're doing this thing wrong and it's not vibing with the group, kick him out. Like, it uses that example talking about the derangements of the Malkavian's weakness, and of course characters can gain derangements when they fed a frenzy as well. And it just sort of, they're playing up the derangements too much and being offensive and just like detracting from the emotions and the gameplay. Pull them aside. We love the enthusiasm, but just tone it down a little bit. Again, I just love the direct communication with that, which of course isn't to say that things like safety tools are bad or anything. It's just that, as I said, I feel a lot of books dance around the subject a lot. Something that I've come to appreciate a lot more as a games master who's run a lot of Vampire, seeing the direction the 5th edition goes with its a billion different fucking amalgam powers that treat it like a fucking D&D spell list, and also just the general bloat that V20 has with all of its different powers, both with the regular and the Dark Ages variant, and other source books that will then add additional powers, including that of 1st edition, is that 1st edition's core book just has the 5 powers of the main disciplines that you can find with the main 7 clans. Which I just really appreciate it, because it just makes things a lot simpler and easier to deal with. You don't have to worry about what's beyond 5th level, because most players aren't going to be dealing with that. It's just most of what you recognise. There are some changes here and there, but it just makes things really simple. You're not having to worry and customise things too much, like, okay, this dot gives you this, that dot gives you that. It's just really straightforward and easy to manage, really. However, there is one thing about this that I find a little irritating, and it's actually with a very comical error with Obfuscate, in that it requires the use of appearance for a lot of its powers. What clan doesn't have any dots and appearance ladles and jelly spoons? What clan relies heavily on Obfuscate? Yes, because that means the Nosferatu can't use Obfuscate. It automatically fails because it doesn't have that core attribute. I don't understand, really, how the developers missed this out. Like, that's a particularly big blunder, unless of course they've just dealt with the fact that it's just the +1 difficulty because you don't have any appearance. But oh boy, that's as I said, a bit fucking silly. I'm also prepared to argue that the 1st edition version of Malkavian is a bit easier to roleplay as well, because you don't have dementation to deal with, it's just dominate. And dementation is a very finicky discipline that requires a lot of subjective and creative, creativity. And I find that a lot of players struggle with dementation. So using dominate as a Malkavian is very different to that of Eventru because of their cultures, their upbringing, and just the conditions of their vampirism. Just makes them for 2 very different beasts, pun not intended. Now, regarding culture, this is perhaps one of my most nitpicky of complaints, but I would have liked the core book to have a bit more information about the Camarilla and the Anarchs and how the different vampires interact with each other, but that is quickly eliminated because it talks a lot about that in the player's guide that I'm going to be talking about. But I do feel a lot of that information could have been in the core book. But as I said, that's incredibly nitpicky, and I also had the bias of knowing quite a lot about Vampire already. And this is just like the new game that's introducing the basics before the additional optional material expand things a lot more, and the eventual bloat that we would get with Vampire within the World of Darkness. But as I said, it's an exceptionally nitpicky point, but it's one that I feel that's worth mentioning all the same, because if you expect 1st edition to have everything like V20, you're going to be highly mistaken, my friends. One last thing I want to talk about before we wrap this sucker up, pun intended, is Frenzy and how it displays itself, because mechanically it's pretty much identical to what 2nd Revised and 20th Anniversary Edition would do, and how it displays itself, being a, rabid monster that wants to run away or suck things off dry. Except that it isn't quite just like that visibly. Like, the examples that it gives of Frenzy in combat can show them being sentient enough of using guns and weapons and just unloading their rounds and like pokey things into their enemies, like just wanting to kill them off that way, which I think is a very interesting change and understanding of Frenzy. Because now that represents a bit more of the sentient human and the bestial vampire at odds with each other, rather than just being like a 28 days zombie sort of thing, running into killing things. I think it adds a interesting level of nuance and ways that the vampire to combat their vampirism and their understanding of humanity. It's nuance that I feel has been lost over the years, unfortunately, but something that I'm definitely going to be considering with my games of Vampire going forward. And honestly, going forward, I think when I run Vampire for people, I do feel I'm going to gravitate a lot more to this older 1st edition, 2nd or revised era. Purely because, well, mainly first, as that's what we're talking about here, just because it's a lot simpler but still has that recognisable energy that is Vampire the Masquerade without all the bloat that would then come shoved into the main core books. I suppose, is this what OSR people feel like with Dungeons & Dragons? They just want to play D&D but without all the other bits and doodads, they just want the core elements of the game. Have I invented Vampire the Masquerade OSR? Look at that! Another cherry popped on the Lore channel. But in all seriousness, or at least semi-seriousness, I just find it a lot more enjoyable. It's a lot easier and straightforward and just not too difficult to explain to people because you have the core essentials there, and then anything else you can just slap on with any other book that's required. And that's the joy with some of this older stuff, is that very little tweaking and homebrewing is required because they all share the same DNA, the same stats and statistics. So you could run the very first edition of Vampire the Masquerade with the very last revised edition scenario, which is one of the ones in Gehenna, with very little issues at all. I mean, be a bit of balancing here and there, I guess, but isn't that gorgeous? Like, the backwards compatibility and the forwards compatibility is just amazing. And really, whether you agree with me or not, it is possible to do that with 5th edition stuff, going backwards as well, but that requires a bit more of effort because some of those stats and systems are different as well, but it still shares some of that same DNA, and it can be done still. And I think that's just an amazing thing. So yeah, as I said already, Vampire the Masquerade 1st edition is just a really great game. And if you want to play Vampire but are just fed up with all the crunch and the systems and just want something that's easier, back to basics with some of that 90s charm, apostrophes, trademark, registered, copyrighted, try 1st edition. Like, let's go back to Monkey. Let's play Vampire the Masquerade 1st edition. What do you think about all this? Do you like Vampire the Masquerade 1st edition? What is your favourite edition of Vampire the Masquerade? I know what most of you are going to say, but I'm prepared to be surprised by the 1 or 2 people who will like 2nd edition more or revised edition more. Or maybe there's some of you who will like 1st edition just as much as I do, or even more so. Yeah, so let me know about all things Vampire in the comments below, and share some of your memories, thoughts, opinions and advice with people so we can have lots more fun with Vampire the Masquerade. Now I'm going to leave affiliate codes to all sorts of Vampire books in the description below, and if you purchase them with those specific links, I get some of the money back because I'm an affiliate on Drive for RPG, and that sort of coinage can help develop the channel so I can purchase cool, awesome shit like this and more. And it allows you to get books as well. But if you've got those books already but want to support me financially still, just go and copy and paste that special affiliate code in the description below and paste it into the URL of any book that you purchase on Drive for RPG, The Storyteller's Vault, etc. and so forth. I am struggling with words right now. Yeah, you do that and I get some of the money back that way. So you get books, I get books, and you get free content, which is an amazing win-win chicken dinner situation for you. But if you can't do that, that's absolutely fine, because I know times are hard and all of that, and this hobby is getting a lot more difficult to get into. So if you can do that, great. If you can't, that's also fine. I won't beat you up for it. But what you should definitely do regardless is give this video a little thumbs up, share this video with anyone and everyone who loves what I do, subscribe to the Lore by Night channel, and I'll see you on the next upload, wherever that may well be for you. And until next time, farewell.